Governments like to present themselves as guardians of stability, protectors of prosperity, and architects of opportunity. They promise growth, security, and a better future for everyone. On the surface, the message sounds reassuring. Trust the system, work hard, pay your taxes, and everything will fall into place. But if you step back and examine history carefully, a different picture begins to emerge. Beneath the speeches, policies, and economic jargon lies a quieter reality, one where financial systems are often designed not merely to serve the public, but to preserve power. And the most effective strategies governments use are not loud or obvious. They are subtle, complex, and often invisible to the average citizen. These silent financial strategies shape economies, influence behavior, and maintain authority without most people ever realizing how the game is played. One of the most powerful tools governments use is control over money itself. Currency is not just a medium of exchange, it is a mechanism of influence. When a government controls the creation and supply of money, it also controls the rhythm of the economy. This is where inflation quietly enters the picture. Inflation is often explained as a natural consequence of economic growth or global market forces. But historically, it has also been a convenient way for governments to manage debt and spending without directly confronting the public. When more money is created, the purchasing power of existing money slowly declines. Prices rise, savings lose value, and the cost of living increases. On paper, no new tax has been announced. But in reality, every citizen holding currency is paying a hidden price. Inflation acts like a silent tax, one that operates quietly in the background while governments continue spending beyond their immediate means. This strategy is far from new. Centuries ago, rulers discovered that adjusting the value of money was easier than openly raising taxes. In ancient empires, coins that were once made of precious metals slowly lost their purity. A coin that once contained mostly silver might later contain more copper than silver, but still carried the same official value. The government could produce more coins with the same amount of metal, effectively stretching its resources. To the public, it appeared that nothing had changed. Yet prices eventually rose, trust in currency weakened, and the real value of people's savings declined. What ancient mints did with metal, modern financial systems do with digital currency and monetary policy. The methods have evolved, but the principle remains the same. Control the currency, and you influence the entire economic landscape. Another silent strategy governments rely on is debt. Debt is often presented as a tool for national progress. Governments borrow money to build infrastructure, stimulate economies, or manage crises. In many cases, these goals are legitimate and beneficial. But debt also serves another purpose. It binds the future to the present. When governments issue bonds, investors purchase them with the expectation of receiving interest over time. These bonds become one of the safest investments available, because they are backed by the authority of the state. Yet the interest paid on those bonds does not appear out of thin air. It ultimately comes from taxpayers. Every road built, every project financed through borrowing, and every bailout funded through debt becomes a commitment carried forward into the future. The public rarely feels the weight immediately, but over time, debt obligations accumulate, shaping national priorities and limiting economic flexibility. This is where the system reveals its deeper structure. The investors who purchase government debt often include banks, financial institutions, and wealthy individuals seeking stable returns. Governments promise to repay these debts with interest, funded by taxation and economic output. In other words, the labor, consumption, and productivity of the broader population guarantee the returns of those who lend money to the state. It becomes a loop where the financial system sustains itself. Governments borrow to operate, investors earn predictable returns, and citizens sustain the cycle through taxes and economic participation. To the average person, this structure appears distant and technical. But it quietly shapes how wealth flows through society. Then there is the strategy of crisis management. Economic crises create fear, uncertainty, and urgency. During these moments, governments often take extraordinary financial actions to stabilize markets. Banks may be rescued, industry supported, and emergency spending approved at unprecedented levels. The justification is usually clear. Without intervention, the entire system might collapse. In many situations, these actions do prevent deeper economic damage. Yet crises also reveal how financial power concentrates. Large institutions that are deeply connected to the financial system are often deemed too important to fail. Their collapse could trigger widespread consequences, so governments step in to support them. Meanwhile, smaller businesses and ordinary workers may receive far less protection. The result is a system where risk can be absorbed collectively, but rewards often remain concentrated among those already positioned at the top. A similar pattern appears in the relationship between governments and regulation. Regulations are designed to protect consumers, maintain safety, and ensure fairness within markets. These goals are essential in any functioning society. But over time, large industries often develop close relationships with the regulatory bodies meant to oversee them. Experts from corporations move into regulatory positions, while regulators eventually move into corporate leadership roles. This exchange of influence can shape how rules are written and enforced. Instead of creating a level playing field, complex regulations may inadvertently strengthen large corporations that have the resources to navigate them. Smaller competitors struggle to keep up, while established players adapt quickly. The public sees regulation as protection, but behind the scenes, influence and power continue to shape outcomes. Complexity itself becomes another powerful strategy. Modern financial systems are incredibly intricate. Government budgets span thousands of pages, tax codes contain endless provisions, and financial instruments carry names that most people have never heard before. This complexity is not always intentional, but it creates a powerful side effect: opacity. When systems become difficult to understand, accountability becomes harder to enforce. Citizens cannot easily trace how money moves through government programs, how policies affect markets, or how financial decisions impact their own lives. Complexity becomes a kind of camouflage, hiding the mechanics of power behind layers of technical language and bureaucratic structure. Pension systems provide another example of how long-term financial commitments can evolve into quiet challenges. Many governments manage retirement systems designed to support citizens after decades of work. Employees contribute throughout their careers with the expectation that these funds will provide stability later in life. But demographic changes, economic shifts, and political decisions can strain these systems over time. In some cases, funds intended for future payouts are used to support current spending, with the promise that future economic growth will cover the difference. When populations age and the ratio of workers to retirees changes, governments are forced to adjust. Retirement ages increase, benefits shift, and the structure of the system evolves. These changes rarely happen overnight, but they illustrate how financial commitments made today shape the realities of tomorrow. Perhaps the most subtle strategy governments employ is narrative. Economic systems do not function on numbers alone, they also rely on trust and perception. Citizens must believe that the system is stable, that institutions are reliable, and that the future will reward their efforts. Governments use language carefully to maintain this confidence. Policies are framed as reforms, adjustments, or stabilization measures. Financial interventions become stimulus packages or economic safeguards. The terminology may be accurate, but it also shapes how the public interprets events. By controlling the narrative, governments guide how people understand economic change and maintain confidence even during uncertainty. All of these strategies, currency management, debt systems, crisis intervention, regulatory influence, complexity, pension structures, and narrative framing, combine to form a quiet architecture of power. None of them are inherently malicious. In many cases, they emerge as practical solutions to complex economic challenges. But together, they create systems that are difficult for ordinary citizens to fully understand or influence. Power becomes embedded within institutions, policies, and financial mechanisms that operate far beyond the daily awareness of most people. Understanding these strategies does not mean rejecting governments or institutions entirely. Every society requires systems of coordination, governance, and economic management. Roads must be built, services must be provided, and crises must be addressed. But awareness changes perspective. When you understand how financial systems function, you become less vulnerable to misunderstanding and more capable of making informed decisions. Economic literacy becomes a form of independence. Instead of simply accepting headlines or political messaging, you begin asking deeper questions. Who benefits from a policy? Who carries the cost? How does money move through the system? History repeatedly shows that financial systems evolve, but the underlying dynamics of power remain remarkably consistent. From ancient empires to modern economies, control over money, debt, and financial institutions has always been closely tied to political authority. Those who understand these systems have a significant advantage, while those who ignore them often bear the consequences without realizing why. In a world where economic headlines dominate the news, inflation rates, interest hikes, government spending, market volatility, understanding the deeper mechanics of finance is more important than ever. Not because it will eliminate economic challenges, but because it allows individuals to navigate them with greater clarity. The silent financial strategies that shape governments and economies will continue to exist. The real question is whether people choose to understand them. Because once you see how the system works, you stop reacting blindly to every economic shift. You begin recognizing patterns, questioning assumptions, and protecting your financial future with greater awareness. Knowledge does not eliminate power structures, but it reduces the chance that you will be quietly shaped by them without realizing it. And that awareness, more than any policy, institution, or economic theory, is where real financial freedom begins.